Welcome to Beyond the Coverage. I'm Chris Horner. In today's episode, we got to go back in time one day to Paris-Roubaix 2025. What really happened at Paris-Roubaix and what should have happened is the topic here on Beyond the Coverage. Now, what really happened is we saw Mathieu van der Poel and, of course, Tadej Pogačar go the distance and smash everyone until Tadej Pogačar overshot the right turn on the cobbles, went off the road. Mathieu van der Poel overshot that same right cobblestone section. He went off the road, but Tadej Pogačar put his front wheel into the hole, then flipped over his handlebars. Of course, Mathieu van der Poel went on to win Paris-Roubaix after they chased each other for 20, 30 kilometers. It was a magnificent finish watching both those guys chasing each other full nonstop. But how did it all come to evolve? How did it happen, and what mistakes were made at the 25 Paris-Roubaix? Well, first off, this is the next day after, so now we got hindsight and we can start to dissect a bit of the topics and know that Wout van Aert, with 170 kilometers to go, actually did go down in a crash, was his words. I caught him on camera, of course, chasing back there after Matej Mohoric had crashed on the right side of the road. Just before the crash of Matej Mohoric, I showed that Wout van Aert was at the back of the peloton. So his first mistake was to be at the back of the peloton with 170 kilometers to go. When we get into 163 is the cobblestone section, and it's been nervous and curb to curb, and we've seen multiple crashes already. Now, if he's at the back of the peloton because he'd gotten behind one of the crashes before that, that would explain why he's at the back. I didn't see that happening, but I did see that he's at the back of the peloton before the crash of Matej Mohoric, and so I would assume that held him up. Now, we did know that he went down in the crash, and that's why he was chasing to get back, and then he's behind the 8-ball all the time. That crash, of course, and Wout van Aert's chasing at the back of the peloton affects what's happening at the front of the peloton, because now Mathieu van der Poel, Tadej Pogačar, and Mads Pedersen with Lidl Trek teammates, they have one less team to deal with. There was only going to be 4, maybe 5 teams battling for the cobblestone sections before that first section of 30 starts, with 163 kilometers to go to begin with, because there's only Alpecin de Koenig, UAE Team Emirates, Lidl Trek, Visma Lease Bike, and of course Ineos there that could have the strength in numbers that could really dictate what was happening at Paris-Roubaix. But when you take Visma Lease Bike out of the picture, that makes it easier for those teams to make it into those cobblestone sections. When you take Visma Lease Bike out of the picture, that eliminates 5, 6, 7 riders from the front of the peloton that could shoot into the first cobblestone section and possibly push Tadej Pogačar, Mathieu van der Poel, Mads Pedersen, Filippo Ganna further back, and then maybe Mads Pedersen or Tadej Pogačar get themselves in a little bit of trouble. Maybe they get stuck overlapping wheels or bumping bars and they start in the wrong position. It could happen. We only have to go back to Milan-San Marino proper to see that the start of the Cipressa, that of course Tadej Pogačar was out of position to start the Cipressa, and that's because the battle for curb to curb is too big and Tadej Pogačar happened to mess up at that one moment. That means that if you take the Cipressa going into the right turn off of the coast and you bring that into Paris-Roubaix, that of course, my tactics up here explaining it to you guys on Beyond the Coverage, is a legitimate possibility that Tadej Pogačar, with one more team called Visma Lease Bike up there fighting for position, he could get caught out in the wrong position, start at the back. That could cause some crashes. That could cause some time holding up. That can cause some more energy for Tadej Pogačar or Mathieu van der Poel or whoever that rider is. So the first help there to Tadej Pogačar and, of course, to Mathieu van der Poel was that Visma Lease Bike eliminated themselves out of the equation going into 163 kilometers with the first section of 30 of cobblestone starting. Then we go into that cobblestone section. We see, of course, that it's Team Ineos on the front with Filippo Ganna. Filippo Ganna's riding fine position. They did a marvelous job to get him into the first cobblestone section in a perfect position. But then bad luck strikes immediately for Filippo Ganna with a flat tire, and he's out of the picture. Now that just makes 5 teams. We lost one with Visma Lease Bike. Now 4 teams. We lose another one. That leaves 3 teams up there to fight for position. But UAE Team Emirates are doing a terrible job of looking after Tadej Pogačar before each and every one of the cobblestone sections coming out. So now you eliminate those. You're left with 2 teams left. With only 2 teams up there, one called Alpecin de Koenig and one called Lidl Trek, that's why we see those 2 teams dominating every entrance of every cobblestone section as we get further into Paris-Roubaix. That also means that Tadej Pogačar, who is fantastic at fighting for position before a left or right crucial moment in any race in the world, that means that he has less riders to fight with. You start taking out 2 teams and you're talking about at least 10 riders, maybe as much as 14 riders, Tadej Pogačar is in a better position going into all the cobblestone sections, even without the help of his UAE Team Emirates. But that means that Mathieu van der Poel and it means that Mads Pedersen's in better position too, which means it's a bit harder for Tadej Pogačar. Because remember, Tadej Pogačar needs the race to be as hard as it possibly can. When we go back to kilometer 0, before the race even began here at Paris-Roubaix, once we start looking at the best riders in the world, Tadej Pogačar is the most elite. That's why he's number 1 on page 1 of everybody's list. The Eddie Merckx of the professional era of cycling right now is called Tadej Pogačar. But there's one other rider, Mathieu van der Poel, who's behind Tadej Pogačar at most races. The problem is, in the classics, and especially here at Paris-Roubaix, there are no climbs. So when you look at Tour of Flanders, they start a bit more even, maybe with Tadej Pogačar, a very, very sliver of a better fitness and form because of the hills at Flanders. But now at Roubaix, it kind of flips a little bit, where now Mathieu van der Poel has a better shot at winning Paris-Roubaix than Tadej Pogačar. That's why I picked Mathieu van der Poel as my favorite to win yesterday's 25 edition. But there's other riders that could be up there at the same level as Tadej Pogačar. That rider's called Mads Pedersen. So Mads Pedersen enters Paris-Roubaix because it's completely flat, because he's a powerful rider, because he has extra weight on his side, because his Lidl Trek teammates are better than UAE team. I would even put Mads Pedersen ahead of Tadej Pogačar, at least at kilometer 0. Now, Mathieu van der Poel and Tadej Pogačar, as the race wears in, they wear about the same. As their form starts to drop down and their fitness starts to drop, they wear about the same the whole time. But Mathieu van der Poel always had that sliver of a lead on Tadej Pogačar. Now, when we're talking about Mads Pedersen, though, at kilometer 0, possibly he's better than Tadej Pogačar. Basically, if it was a 10-kilometer race, would you bet on Tadej Pogačar? No, you'd bet on Mads Pedersen. But we know it's a 269-kilometer race, so Tadej Pogačar's fitness, of course, could start to surpass Mads Pedersen as you get further in the race. That's why Mads Pedersen has to be perfect through all the cobblestone section. His team has to be perfect in placing him at the front, and you have to hope that Tadej Pogačar gets shuffled back. But because of the loss of Visma Lease bike, you have one less team up there fighting for position, so the odds of Tadej Pogačar starting further back than the front of each and every cobblestone section becomes less and less likely because Tadej Pogačar is masterful at putting himself at the front of the peloton before crucial sections. So Mads Pedersen's plan coming into Paris-Roubaix should be start every cobblestone section in front of Tadej Pogačar, put as many of my teammates in front of Tadej Pogačar as we can. I brought up this tactic before Milan-San Remo started proper on Beyond the Covers, where I said the best you can hope for is to come into the Cipressa and get Tadej Pogačar further back when the Cipressa starts proper, so it takes him and his teammates more time to get to the front. That same tactic applies at every one of the 30 cobblestone sections here at Paris-Roubaix, is that Lidl Trek and Mads Pedersen have to have Tadej Pogačar further back in the peloton. That will slow down his attack if he is trying to make an attack on that particular section of cobblestones. It means if he's 20 guys back, just like on the Cipressa, if he's 20 guys back on the cobblestones and he wants to attack on that section, he's got to make up 20 spots before he can get to the front. If you're Mads Pedersen starting the front of the cobblestones, it means your legs could be a bit fresher. Now, with those in mind, with Visma Lease Bike's team out of the picture, UAE Team Emirates team not doing a very good job at all throughout Paris-Roubaix to help Tadej Pogačar, that means Lidl Trek and, of course, Mathieu van der Poel's team, Alpecin de Koenig, are the only two teams at the front because Ineos are chasing again for 30 kilometers and won't come back into the picture until 130 kilometers to go, when we will see Ineos start getting back on the front. We go into that magical moment of the very first absolute knuckleheadism mistake made at Paris-Roubaix, and that's going to be at 103 kilometers to go when we see Mads Pedersen start the first attack. Okay, this could be a tactical masterpiece plan if Mads Pedersen was to start the attack in hopes to send either Tadej Pogačar or Mathieu van der Poel up the road solo. If that was his plan, it was masterful, but that's clearly not his plan, so he's a knucklehead. When he starts to attack at 103 kilometers to go and Tadej Pogačar closes up onto the Trek rider, and then Tadej Pogačar throws in another acceleration. If Mads Pedersen had let Tadej Pogačar go solo at that moment, it would have been a master class of tactician work here from Mads Pedersen. But I've never seen that kind of tactician work there from Mads Pedersen throughout all the years that I've been covering him on the Butterfly Effect and Beyond the Coverage. So, of course, he starts chasing Tadej Pogačar. Now, let's say he doesn't chase Tadej Pogačar at this moment when the Slovenian threw in his first big acceleration at the 25 edition of Paris-Roubaix. Well, Tadej Pogačar goes solo. Mads Pedersen looks back over his shoulder. If Mathieu van der Poel does not close the gap up to Tadej Pogačar, which if Mathieu van der Poel was intelligent, he wouldn't have closed the gap up to Tadej Pogačar at that moment either. He would have let the Slovenian stay out there and flounder out there and do a solo effort for 100 and plus kilometers here on the Paris-Roubaix. He would have left him out there. Worst case scenario, Tadej Pogačar catches the break up there that's left up of about 7 riders at that moment, because the Ineos rider, I believe, had dropped out just about that time when we're talking about Kim Hajduk. He was back there helping Josh Tarling later in the group. So I assume there's 7 riders up the road. Tadej Pogačar bridges to that 7. Maybe someone in that 7 would work with the Slovenian, but for how long they could work with the Slovenian, I can't imagine very long. So Tadej Pogačar would be solo shortly after catching those guys. But let's say 1 or 2 did work. They would only be able to work minor. We go back and look at Albacete de Koenig. Mathieu van der Poel, who had teammates back there. He rides his team on the front while Tadej Pogačar is going solo. The only way to beat a more superior rider is to have that rider in the wind, to have that rider get caught behind a crash, to have that rider get held up going into the cobblestone sections and start from 20th, 30th, 50th, 100th position so that they're wrecking their legs throughout each and every one of the sections that they start at the back. Or, of course, to have a rider solo up the road. If you cannot bring back a rider as Tadej Pogačar attacking with over 100 kilometers to go with your own teammates, Albacete de Koenig, and with help from Lidl Trek, and with help from Ineos, and with help from FDJ, Stefan Kuhn's team, then you weren't going to beat him anyways. Instead, Mathieu van der Poel, of course, covered the attack of the Slovenian, Mads Pedersen covering the wheel of Mathieu van der Poel, and everything is brought back together as we start going into the forest. Again, at this moment, Tadej Pogačar should have been solo, but the riders have made mistakes. Now we see that Ineos are on the front. This goes back to what I said. If Filippo Ganna hadn't flatted, Ineos would have been at the front more. There would have been more guys fighting for that position. But now Tadej Pogačar is in a fine position, starting the forest just behind Ineos and Lidl Trek when he starts throwing in his acceleration with Wout van Aert, who's finally got himself in the right position, but his legs just are not going to be good enough at this moment. As Tadej Pogačar accelerates through the forest, again, what happens? First off, Wout van Aert follows the acceleration of Tadej Pogačar. Mads Pedersen, of course, pushes Wout van Aert off the wheel, and then Mads Pedersen holds that position instead of, again, just letting Tadej Pogačar go. Okay, we know the story. I already covered that tactic just a moment ago. So everybody stays together. Mathieu van der Poel goes to the front, blows it up. We have an elite selection coming off of the forest of about 10 riders. We see another 6 come back on as Matthew Brennan from Visma Lease Bike bring that group back together. And Wout van Aert is not capable of closing the gap, and we won't see him at the front again. Once we go further into the story, though, we'll have 5 riders left at the front. Poggi is there. Mathieu van der Poel's there. His teammate Jasper Philipsen's there. Mads Pedersen is there. And Bissinger is there. Bissinger rides for AG2R and clearly has some good legs here at Paris-Roubaix. But Bissinger's a knucklehead. In fact, all of these guys are going to be a knucklehead with the exception of Jasper Philipsen. When we look at Bissinger, Bissinger is rotating through with 2 of the finest, most exceptional, legendary riders that we have been able to witness from the Chesterfield throughout our whole life. And that's talking about Mathieu van der Poel and Poggi. If you're around and you got to watch some races with Eddie Merckx, you can argue with me, but nobody else can if they have not seen Eddie Merckx racing. So at this moment, Bissinger is making the most easily visible knucklehead move you can possibly have, and that is to be pulling with Mathieu van der Poel and Poggi. It is a mistake of epic proportion that every rider that's ever pulled with the #1 ranked rider in the world usually learns, and right now at this moment Mathieu van der Poel is ahead of Tadej Pogačar because we're at Paris-Roubaix and not Flanders and not the Tour de France. So at this moment, Bissinger is a knucklehead of epic proportion doing rotating pulls with the 5 riders in front. Now, we see later, when we see the attack from Tadej Pogačar, we see Mads Pedersen again making another mistake, the exact same mistake that I've talked about multiple times. He covers the attack of Tadej Pogačar. His front tire blows out. He's out of the race. Mathieu van der Poel closes up the gap. Jasper Philipsen closes up the gap. And then we see the next big mistake. And this mistake was highlighted in one of the articles of Cycling News where Sean Kelly agreed, as I did, that when Mathieu van der Poel attacks with his teammate, the fastest sprinter in the world, named Jasper Philipsen, who's podium here at Paris-Roubaix in the past, when he attacks and drops his own teammate, it's a team-on-team crime. There's no doubt about it. There's no other way to look at this. I don't know if Mathieu van der Poel is thinking correctly at this moment or if he actually wanted to get rid of the fastest sprinter in the world, his teammate, but it is certainly an Alpecin de Koenig crime on Alpecin de Koenig rider crime. So, this is a huge knucklehead mistake because now he's made it easier for Tadej Pogačar. We will never know later after that right turn when Tadej Pogačar took it too fast, went off the road, put his wheel in the front ditch and crashed, and Mathieu van der Poel went on to solo Paris-Roubaix. If it would have been a different story, but quite possibly the Slovenian, if he doesn't crash there, if they stay together, if Mathieu van der Poel has a flat or mechanical, we saw that with 15 kilometers ago, Tadej Pogačar could have won Paris-Roubaix because Mathieu van der Poel dropped the fastest sprinter in the world for no reason whatsoever. So there was a ton of mistakes made throughout Paris-Roubaix, and when I'm sitting on the Chesterfield, I'm viewing all of these mistakes live and bringing them to you after the race. But remember, when you're watching it live, you're listening to a lot of commentators, certainly like Bob Roll and a bunch of other commentators that I've watched throughout my career. Sean Kelly is actually a very good commentator, and Robbie McEwen is probably the best and most accurate commentator that I've ever watched in cycling. But most of the other ones don't pick up on these mistakes that the riders are making, and when they're calling you guys the action and you're sitting at home on your own Chesterfield, you have to know right away that when Mathieu van der Poel drops one Jasper Philipsen while he's pulling the #1 ranked rider in the world, that's a knucklehead mistake. There's no other way to look at it. And it took a crash from Tadej Pogačar in order to give Mathieu van der Poel a better shot at winning Paris-Roubaix. So, make sure you guys like and subscribe. Of course, I bring you all the analysis and the details of the bike racing here on Beyond the Coverage. Make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys for the next video real soon.